In 1967, a manga artist called Kazuhiko Kato created a story about a master thief who was the grandson of the fictional French thief Arsène Lupin. The story was published in Weekly Manga Action, and for some reason unknown even to Kato himself, his editor did so under the name Monkey Punch. This is the start of Lupin III, a James Bond-esque series with action, comedy and thrills. From here, it went on to spawn numerous anime adaptations, movies, music collections and even video games, though not many of those actually made it outside Japan. It's also had a pretty significant influence on quite a bit of media both in and outside of Japan, and while it's not the most talked about series when compared to some long runners, continues to maintain a strong fanbase to this day. Not that I'd really understand why you would ask me this, but if you were to, I'd say the appeal of it comes from being a fairly simple premise to write for. All you need for a good Lupin story is a treasure to steal, the core 5 cast, and more often than not an antagonist to match wits with. You can shift the tone in any way you want, with a light-hearted adventure in one story and then a gritty and dark, but still comedic mind trip in the next. And speaking of the core 5 cast, let's take a look at them. First and foremost, we've got the main character himself, Lupin III. Grandson of Arsène Lupin, he's a master thief with quick wits and a love of cars and women. He rarely loses, but when he does, he will always find a way around it so that the next time the same trick won't work. His favourite weapon is his trusty Walther P38. Next up is Daisuke Jigen, Lupin's partner in crime and most loyal friend. A former hitman who has a network of underground connections, he's usually seen with his revolver, but is an expert with any sort of firearm, not to mention also a skilled pilot. Third up is Fujiko Mine, Lupin's on-again, off-again love interest. She's a femme fatale who's largely out for herself, but does at least have some loyalty to Lupin and knows he'll always help out when things get too rough for her to handle. Lupin's pretty head over heels for her, but Jigen is not shy about letting it be known that he does not trust her. Next up is Goemon Ishikawa the 13th, descendant of the folklore hero. A wandering samurai who usually ends up caught in a heist even if it does seem unconnected at first. He wields the Zantetsuken sword, capable of cutting through damn near anything. And last but not least, we have Inspector Zenigata. If Lupin is Roadrunner, Zenigata's his Coyote. He's an inspector with the ICPO who stops at nothing in order to see Lupin arrested. While he isn't incompetent when it comes to lower level villains, Lupin is just that much better than him to the point where it makes Zenigata come off as comic relief. It should be emphasised that it's Lupin who makes him come off as comic relief. If you're a lower level villain, don't underestimate him. For me personally, I was exposed to Lupin back when the Sci-Fi Channel still spelled its name properly. I'd often catch the late night anime movie airings in the early 2000s, which allowed me to see several anime classics, such as Perfect Blue, Ghost in the Shell, Appleseed, MD Geist. Maybe that one's more a classic for the wrong reasons. Anyway, one movie I caught was called The Castle of Cagliostro, which I found to be quite an enjoyable adventure film. Back then it was mostly dubbed films, so the version I saw called him Wolf due to legal reasons, so I wasn't aware of how big this franchise was yet. I caught 2 other films after that, each with their own tone but also quite enjoyable. And soon after I learned that this Wolf character, or Lupin as he's obviously known, had a pretty big stack of media behind it. I've watched a few other movies throughout the years, but it was really back in 2016 when I decided to sit down and watch through the whole thing. And that brings me to the purpose of this video series. I intend to recap and give my thoughts on every single Lupin III anime. 300 plus TV episodes, the 30 plus movies. I'm setting myself up for a pretty long project here, especially if I take time and do other projects in between episodes. I'll recap about 4 or 5 episodes per video, so anyone who watches these isn't left with a 10-hour video covering 100 episodes or something. I'm also going to stick to the Japanese version, seeing as there's a bit more consistency with the voice cast compared to the many English voice casts, some of which may or may not include Richard Epcar voicing one of the core five, even Fujiko probably at one point. Though if something does come up with the English cast that may be of interest, I will probably mention it. If you'd like to see some other videos on Lupin as a series, then check out Planet Tyro or Mangaman's channels, as they have their own series of videos reviewing and recapping Lupin themselves. A humble professor's analysis of the cast of Cagliostro is also a good watch, so feel free to check that one out too. As for websites, Lupin Encyclopedia is also a good place to check out pretty much everything related to Lupin, and it's probably better researched than anything I talk about here. So go ahead and hit that place up, tell them I sent you. They'll probably respond with, "Who the hell's Shadow Warrior Luke?" But hey, the sentiment's there at any rate. I'm sure they'll all have opinions that I don't, so if you decide to stick with me through this, then I salute you. So with that, let's go all the way back to the first animated adaptation, the pilot short. Tokyo Movie Shinsha, better known nowadays as TMS Entertainment, expressed an interest in adapting Lupin III into animation, so they created a 12-minute short film in order to generate interest among investors for a larger project. This was animated twice in different aspect ratios for television and cinema, with different voice casts used each time. The version filmed for cinema saw Taiichiro Hirokawa, Goro Naya and Shinsuke Chikaishi as Lupin, Goemon and Zenigata respectively. The version filmed for TV saw Nachinozawa, Osamu Kobayashi and Chikawa Otsuka in those roles. Jigen and Fujiko kept the same actors across both versions, being voiced by Kiyoshi Kobayashi and Eiko Masuyama respectively. In fact, in the case of the former, the choice was based on Jigen's design origins. See, Jigen was based on the actor James Coburn, in particular his character Brit in Magnificent Seven. Kiyoshi Kobayashi at the time was the Japanese dubber for Coburn, so his casting was based largely on that. If you ask me, Lupin himself seems to take a few design cues from another Coburn character, namely that of Derek Flint. Not sure if that's intentional or not, but there are some similarities, which I suppose makes sense, seeing as both of them have cues from James Bond in their origins. And I kinda suspect that most people watching this only know of Derek Flint because of Austin Powers making a reference to it. We open on Zenigata playing shogi with a phone caller who turns out, of course, to be Lupin. Zenigata draws the game out, hoping to keep him on the line and track the phone call. Lupin then reveals that he already won the game before it started, urging Zenigata to take a piece, and discovering that Lupin has already swapped it out preemptively. They track the call to a nearby phone booth, but by the time Zenigata gets down there, all he finds is a shogi piece with his name on it. And then the phone booth explodes. It happens. We're then treated to a montage of the cast doing stuff that defines them. Lupin with his love of cars and high-thrill adventure, including a now rather iconic sequence of him running along a wall with searchlights blaring. Jigen, of course, has his gunplay and his partnership with Lupin. Fujiko has her sex appeal, her hidden deceptiveness, her love of bikes and Lupin's fondness for her. Goemon has his sword fighting skills and his training to improve said sword fighting skills. And in between all of this, we get our main plot. Following the explosion, Lupin laughs at his successful trolling of Zenigata, but Jigen shoots out a wine glass he's about to drink from. The glass is poisoned. Lupin initially suspects Fujiko, but she denies it. They then spot Goemon in the distance, and I should probably mention that Goemon is actually Lupin's enemy initially. The police track and surround Lupin, but have little success catching him or his friends, so Goemon volunteers to head in himself to kill Lupin. This doesn't work, as the one he attacks is some guy in a Lupin costume. A fellow detective is among Zenigata's force, Kogoro Akechi. Like Lupin, he has origins from literature and gets referenced a fair amount in a lot of media. Detective Conan's Kogoro Mori and Persona 5's Goro Akechi would be two examples you might know of that were based on him. Anyway, Akechi decides to show off his own plan to catch Lupin, throwing a rope through a window, tying it to a car, and driving off with Jigen and Fujiko attached to a giant kite, unmasking to reveal that it was Lupin in disguise. The real Akechi's amused by this, Zenigata and Goemon less so, and they curse the gang as they drive off into the distance. And that's it. In terms of plot, it's nothing substantial, but it's a pitch video, so I suppose it doesn't really need to be. It does an effective job of showing off what the series is about, and obviously it managed to find its audience eventually. I'm rather a fan of the music here. It's composed by Norio Maeda, who captures the tone quite well with a rather jazzy feel that later series would be defined by, and generally it has a rather fun feeling to the soundtrack. It does a decent job of showing off who's who and some of their notable traits, and of course you always suspect that someone somewhere is probably Lupin in disguise, possibly even you watching this video right now. Never did find out who poisoned that wine though. Next time I'll begin the anime franchise proper with the first 4 episodes of Lupin III Part 1. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll stick with me until then.